On New Year's Day, 1860, as the bells rang in a new year in Maryland, a slave woman named Ruth took her master to the church tower and hanged him from the very rope meant to call the faithful. This is her story. The setting is Maryland, a border state on the edge of war. Though not as vast as the cotton kingdoms of the Deep South, Maryland still held thousands in bondage. Here, slavery lived in tobacco fields, in kitchens, and in the shadows of churches. In 1860, Ruth lived as one of those enslaved. She was property-owned, traded, controlled. And her master, like so many of his kind, saw cruelty as his right. Ruth endured beatings, endless labor, and the daily stripping away of her humanity. But Ruth was not broken. Beneath the surface of obedience, she carried a defiance that no chain could silence. And soon, her fury would find its voice in the most shocking way imaginable. Life for enslaved women was a cage within a cage. Ruth was forced to work from before sunrise until nightfall. She cooked, cleaned, washed, carried, and like so many enslaved women, she was vulnerable not only to physical abuse, but to exploitation of the worst kind. Every day, she walked a tightrope between survival and despair. Her master, a man who carried both wealth and arrogance, was known for his temper. The lash was his answer to disobedience. His voice thundered through the house like judgment, and Ruth, bound to his whims, was forced to endure his cruelty. But in late 1859, something changed. Perhaps it was an act of humiliation too far. Perhaps it was the beating of someone Ruth loved. Perhaps it was the cold, bitter New Year's Eve, when the master mocked his slaves and drank himself into violence. We cannot know the exact spark, but we do know this. By the dawn of 1860, Ruth had resolved to end him. The church tower stood tall above the plantation. Its bell called the community to gather, to worship, to begin the year. Ruth knew its rope well, thick, coarse, strong enough to lift a bell weighing hundreds of pounds. She had seen it swing, had heard its voice across the fields. And in that rope, Ruth saw more than a call to prayer. She saw a weapon. She waited. She planned. Perhaps she chose New Year's Day, deliberately when the bell would be rung, when all would hear, when the year would begin not with his voice, but with his silence. The morning came, January 1st, 1860. The air was sharp, the sky heavy with winter. The church stood silent, its bell rope dangling in the tower. Ruth led her master there, whether by trick, by drink, or by force. The record does not tell, but she brought him up those steps. Inside the bell tower, the rope hung thick and heavy, smelling of tar and hemp. Ruth's hands, rough from years of labor, took hold, and in one chilling, unthinkable act she wrapped the rope around her master's neck. She pulled. Perhaps the bell itself tolled as his body struggled. Perhaps the sound of iron against iron echoed across the plantation. Imagine the sight. A master who once held her life in his hands, now hanging lifeless in the tower above. And Ruth, standing below, had turned the symbol of faith into the tool of justice. In that moment, Ruth had done what few enslaved people dared to dream. She had taken her master's life, not in secret with poison, not in whispers of rebellion, but in the open, on the very first day of a new year. History is cruel in what it chooses to remember. We know Ruth's name. We know the year. We know the actor master hanged in a church tower on New Year's Day. But her fate? The records fall silent. In a world where even suspicion of resistance brought torture and death, Ruth's capture and punishment would have been inevitable. Enslaved people accused of murder face swift, brutal justice, whippings, execution, or worse, their stories buried in silence. But the memory of Ruth S.X. survived not in the proud halls of the Master S family, but in whispers, in folklore, in the shadowed corners of history. To some, she was a monster, a warning of what enslaved people might do if left unchecked. To others, she was a hero, a woman who dared to claim her own justice when no court, no law, no god of her master would grant it. Ruth's story reminds us that enslaved people were not passive. They resisted in small acts and in great. They fought with silence, with escape, with rebellion, and sometimes with rope and fire. Ruth's act, shocking and violent, was also a declaration that the enslaved were never powerless. This was Ruth's story. One woman, one act of defiance, ringing out on New Year's Day, 1860. Her master thought himself eternal, untouchable, but Ruth proved otherwise. Her name survives, even when her fate does not. And Ruth was not alone. For every name we know, there are thousands more whose stories have been lost, voices silenced by time, erased by fear. Yet each act of resistance tells us the same truth. The enslaved fought back. Always. If you want to hear more stories like Ruth's, stories of survival and defiance from the darkest chapters of history, watch the playlist here. And don't forget to subscribe because these voices deserve to be remembered.